Welcome to Curito Connects. I'm your host, Jenn, and I've been conversing with friends around the world about life challenges and impactful moments. Conversations on this platform look at answering the questions how we overcome challenges and how our experiences shape who we are and the work we do today. I hope this work can inspire you on your own personal and individual journey. Let's dive right in. Hello, my guest today is Tokyo-bred global citizen, Kyoto-based Momoko Nakamura, also known as Momo, founder of Kyoto Research Institute. Hi, Momo, and welcome to Curito Connects.
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, I'm so honored to have you. So, fun fact, I met Momo through another Curito Connects guest, IC Liu, who invited me to join Momo's first curated retreat with Mana Homes last December. And prior to this amazing experience I had, I also watched Momo with Michelle Obama on the Netflix cartoon series Waffles and Mochi back in 2021. So to top this off, Momo has also her own podcast as well. And therefore, I am so honored to have her here today to share with us all the amazing things she does, but also the struggle of sharing the intangible ways. So without further ado, I will let Momo introduce herself and take us on her journey of what it means to share intangible in intangible ways.
Thank you so much, Jen. Um, I always wonder exactly how I should introduce myself, but I suppose that today I can introduce myself as leading a organization called Kyoto Research Institute. Kyoto Research Institute is really focused on researching heritage Japanese materials. And what I mean by that are it's materials that are based in natural resources that, through the hands of Japanese technique, become heritage Japanese materials. And the reason why I'm interested in researching this space is because I believe that there are hints for how we may live more sustainably, more thoughtfully through these materials and techniques. And we are best served to share this intelligence, both domestically and internationally, as opposed to just kind of holding it to ourselves. So the sharing is very intentional. It's really needs to be both culturally and environmentally responsible. But again, I do really believe that in sharing, we can build a more thoughtful, more sustainable global ecosystem. So I'm always running around the Japanese countryside searching for materials that can be leveraged and woven into our life in practical ways today.
I'm going to come back to that part, but I want to rewind us further back to where is Momo from and how did we get to today? This is like taking us on a very quick timeline, if you may.
Yes. Who am I? Where am I from? I grew up between the US and Japan. My hometown in Japan is Tokyo, so I was always going back and forth between elsewhere and Tokyo. Um, and I was educated in New York, and then I returned to Tokyo to begin doing this sort of regional research work, field work. Um, and most recently, about 2.5 years ago, I relocated to Kyoto, which is my home now. And part of the reason why I'm in Kyoto is because my family is originally from Kyoto and my parents are back here now. Um, and another reason is because the cultural field work that I do always has a dotted line to Kyoto. as the original capital of Japan, and it and as the cultural capital of Japan today, a lot of these heritage materials and techniques uh, were kind of like collated in Kyoto historically. And so, whether I'm doing field research in the mountains or in the oceans, somehow those materials and techniques always find their way to Kyoto. So, it's a really great place to have a base doing this
Mm.
work.
And so when you were growing up, having been shuffled around between countries, do you feel like from an early young age that the essence of Japanese culture, whether it came from cooking or um, different little lifestyle ways, stuck to you? Like that was something that was, I guess, because kids who grew up in various countries, when you get shifted around, sometimes you lose that part of your identity and your culture, right? Because you grew up in the States or you grew up in Europe, and you're like, well, I'm American now, and I want to do everything Americanized and nothing to do with my Japanese culture. So could you share with us a little bit about that? Like growing up, was that something that stuck with you, or you were like, anti all that stuff? And how did that affect, I guess, your curiosity and your studies to what you're doing now?
Yes. Well, I think part of it is my personality. I was painfully shy growing up. And so I spent a lot of time at home. And my home was kind of like, even when I was abroad, inside the home was very much like a little Japan. And so my parents read Japanese newspapers, and on television were VHS recorded television shows that were sent to us from our cousins and grandparents. And then we ate Japanese food. And so I felt like I had like a um, dual personality experience growing up, probably, where once I stepped outside of the home, I was in one country, and then I would open the door into another country when I was at home. And I was maybe a unique case where even from a young age, I felt quite. Um, there was something I felt odd about being away from Japan. I didn't feel so comfortable being in the US. And so the several times a year where we can go back to Japan was kind of like a relief, where I could relax. And I always kind of share with uh, people that even if you're eating the same foods, like let's say a miso soup in the US, prepared essentially the same way, using essentially the same ingredients, the actual flavor profile and experience of eating that miso soup in the US and in Japan can feel very different. And some of it, I studied macrobiotics in traditional Japanese cookery, but they say that um, the chi, or the energetic lines in the food, for example, the produce, is different based on the terroir. So this, even though you can make a miso soup using carrots in one country, the vibration of that food is different actually than if you would to use a carrot in Japan. And so I feel like I was maybe overly sensitive to those energies, that chi that was flowing in the food. But there's something a little bit, I don't know. Um, I felt like I was maybe in the wrong place sometimes when I was in the US.
Oh, but you stayed there for a long time though. So it sounds like you always had this like very, very deep root in you that was like, you need to be in Japan where the terroir there and the produce and everything else that is so dear to you is there, but yet you still spent a good chunk of your like early 20s, like your career, big early career in the US, right? And what kept you there?
Yes, I spent a huge chunk of time, of huge, I guess, part of my life in the US, and some of my time in the UK. And um, I suppose that one thing that helped me be outside of Japan was that I didn't just live in one place. Like um, I first grew up in Portland, Oregon, and then I was in New York, and then I was in London, and then back in New York, and then in Los Angeles, and then back in New York. Um, and so moving, I suppose, was something that um, fueled my curiosity and my sense of kind of exploration and sense of place. And clearly, when you're in a new place, there's so much additional learning that can be happen, and also growing of your own kind of tribe and community can also happen, and tickling different parts of your soul. Um, and so that was really thrilling to me. Being outside of Japan was never a bore, or I was never particularly disgruntled by it, but I think I always felt like I had a soulful connection to Japan, and where I can really rest my body.
Hmm.
Mm.
And so when you hopped around these different places, um, was it challenging for you, to like have to keep picking up yourself and moving every few years? Maybe it's for a different job at the time, or were you doing research at the time? Like what kept you kind of living this, not really, I mean, guess back in the day it'd be more like a nomadic lifestyle, just that you weren't carrying your laptop around and living in different places for 6 months at a time. But to move around cross country in the US and obviously going to Europe as well, were you doing the same, I guess, like research work, or were you still in the microbiome studies, or you were doing food related things? Like what was the thread that kept you going in the, in this consistent path? Or were there ups and downs along the way, that was hard, because moving can be hard, like you said earlier, but it's true, like you said, because you're curious, it's like always exciting. You're like, oh cool, I'm in a new place, I get to meet like new people and see what I can do here. So it is a mindset thing, isn't it?
Yes, I do think it is a mindset thing. I never had too much kind of what is it called?
Like
Like
fear.
yeah, fear, or I was it was easy for me to move. It's it I was light-footed, I suppose. And for me, the common thread, I suppose, throughout my life was always food and like cookery. Uh, I grew up in a family where my father would say that we don't eat to live, but we live to eat. And so my childhood was very much in and around just eating and dining together as a family. And we ate out a lot too, and we experienced other cultures through food. And we also shared our love with one another through food. And it was very much centered around the culinary arts. But um, as I grew older, I think that that was something that became so ingrained in my body that I began to strive for a career in the communication of food. I never thought of myself as a cook, and I that was not something that was interesting to me to pursue. But the communicating and sharing of food was hugely interesting. And when I was growing up and going back and forth between the US and Japan, I was always watching Japanese television shows that kind of had a food focus. And there are a lot of food related entertainment programs in Japan at the time in the 80s and the 90s. Uh, but I had noticed that in the US, for example, there are very few entertainment shows around food. It was mostly kind of like the PBS shows where we call cooking to camera, but it was just kind of like going through the steps of a recipe. And so as a young child, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to create these more entertainment type shows in the US at some point in the future? And as kismet, really, when I graduated from undergrad, um, the Japanese program called Iron Chef was looking to be remade in the US as an American show. And so a group of producers were ideating how this Japanese program can be um, pivoted so that it works in the US for an American audience. And so then I joined that production group to launch a program called Iron Chef America. And then ultimately, that's kind of how my television career started.
Hmm.
Yes, and then that's what took me to all of these other places.
Oh. Did you find it hard as like an Asian woman in that field at the time, or that wasn't a thing?
It's a total thing.
It's a
Yes, 100%. It's a total thing. It was in retrospect, I think it was quite tough. And to be perfectly honest, that's one of the reasons why I left television 10 plus years ago was that it's definitely an old boys club, um, an old white boys club. And to be in that was challenging to navigate. And being an Asian woman, your physical stature and your kind of like childlike features can be um, a negative resource, I suppose. And certainly there were comments that were made or situations that occurred that um, happened because I was an Asian woman for sure. Um, so while the work I was doing was hugely interesting to me, and I was so thrilled to do it, and it was exciting and fun and educational, um, and it was really um, enthralling to know that the programming was reaching such a wide audience. But the inner workings of the people relationships often proved difficult.
Mm, mm. So when you chose to leave, did you continue to stay on in television work, or did you shift to something else? And then at what point in this timeline did you go, okay, I'm done with, I'm done with the US, I'm done with TV network, I'm done with cookery, and you know, like, I guess, what was the aha moment for you to make that, like, shift in, okay, I'm going to pack up my bags and move back to Japan? Because that takes a lot, right? Like, and it's kind of like a long time coming. It's almost like when people say, I want to quit my job, I want to quit my job, and then I want to find another job, or like, I want to move countries, or, you're in a really comfortable relationship with someone and you're like, but it's not really serving me anymore. I really should break up with this person. That kind of like that, that point in time where you're like, well, when do I say, okay, I'm done? And then have the courage to kind of move to the next thing.
Yeah. I think that there are several variables that came together for me. One was that I had always envisioned being in Japan um, as an adult. And while um, that was clear, um, another kind of aspect that was clear was that I wasn't interested in joining like a large Japanese company. And at the time, there weren't that many other options other than, kind of a classic traditional Japanese company setup. And so when I was kind of preparing to be back in Japan, one thought that was, or one goal, I suppose, was that I needed to be able to work um, on my own, like as a freelancer, independent from any company. And so part of it was that I was kind of putting all of my ducks in a row to make that happen. And then there was like this other variable that was happening at the same time, which was television was no longer pure content anymore. By that time, like 2010, 11, 12, um, the programming was very like content was mixed with uh, paid advertisement, I
Mm.
guess. Um, Product placement is what we called it. So it wasn't that content was separated from commercials, but somewhere along the way, the content and the commercials merged. And as I was doing television, I that was feeling uncomfortable to me. And then the other part that began to kind of feel uncomfortable was that we were often making programming for the future. None of this was live television. And so, you would be making holiday programming midsummer. And then ultimately, that programming would air. And then you would just get feedback through the ratings. Was it good? Was it bad? But you would never really know who the person on the other side of the screen was. And so I was not only looking to be in Japan, I was also looking to focus on more pure content centered work. And then I was also looking to be closer to other human beings. And so I think all of those things just came together. Um, I don't know, when I moved to Japan, when was that? Like 13 years ago or so.
Oh, has it been 13 years?
Yeah, somewhere around that 10 to 13 years ago, I think. I'm trying to remember because I was going back and forth along a lot
Oh,
during that
okay.
time too. Yeah.
So when you
Yeah.
did the mochi and waffle episode, you were in Japan already.
Correct. Yeah. So that came about because I had been in food television for quite some time prior to me being in Japan. And so there were a lot of relationships that I hold near and dear through that work. And they were looking for a navigator in Japan to take these dear, sweet puppets um, across Japan to explore various
Rice.
ingredients. Yes, rice and mushrooms and salt, I think, are the episodes that I did. And so then that's when I moved from being behind the camera to being more in front of the camera.
Was that scary?
It was interesting. It's a very, very different experience, obviously. But it's interesting to me because my passion is to wax lyrical about all of the things that I learned through the field work in the Japanese countryside. So to have any opportunity to do that through speaking with someone like you, Jen, or through real life experiences like retreats or workshops, or through publishing, it's always a joy.
I guess I asked because you had mentioned, when you were younger, you were very shy. So doing something on camera versus behind the scenes and curating that is very different, isn't it?
It really, really is. The behind the camera, you're kind of like a backseat driver. You can say, do this, do that. I think this, you're kind of like puppeteering, but being in front of the camera or being responsible for your own face, your own gestures, your own words is obviously a very different thing. Um, but for me, I think the opportunity to be able to share my learnings with the world was um, overwrites any sort of fear or embarrassment that I may have felt.
That's so true, right? Because it's like you're so passionate about it that it's like you want the world to know. So you're okay to be you, be your authentic self and share it versus I guess if today it's like, well, can you go act and and create this read this script. It'd be very different because you're like, well, this is not how I feel and I don't believe in this and I can't say it. So it'd be a little different.
Yes, exactly. I'm happy to put my face and voice on the line for to be able to speak about these topics.
Okay, so I wanted to go back to your beginning intro when you were sharing about what Kyoto Research Institute is about, and then we can thread in, your theme you picked about intangible and tangible. Um, what do you think? Because obviously you're seeing where the world is today in regards to food and cookery. So I'm just very curious for you too with the work you're doing. Is it because what is it? I mean, obviously in part is you're passionate about it and you grew up with it, but also is it also because of what we're seeing happening in the the global picture with all this that you feel an even stronger drive to be like people need to know more about this and it's not just about how the terroir in Japan is or Japan itself, but how can you apply what you're discovering here back home into your own country and your culture and your food culture.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of sharing internationally about um, hyper local um, cultural uh, techniques or materials. Um, but to date, I feel like Japan hasn't been so um, open nor
Mm,
necessarily graceful about it. And part of it, I think, is just language or cultural barriers. Sometimes it's geographic barriers, the fact that Japan is this small island country. Um, and the other is just kind of like um, Japanese personality is not so is not so uh, used to sharing. Period. Um, and and when I through the years, as I see other cultures really intentionally and um, beautifully sharing their culture with others, I thought there must be a different way to do it from Japan too. In Japan, I think the world knows Japan through some food things like sushi or tempura, maybe some cultural things like manga, anime, maybe some historic things like samurai and ninjas or geishas. um, but that's not Japan. Um, Japan is actually something that is colored very, very differently. And Japanese people also know it to be very, very differently than probably what the world may have perceived to date. And so I always thought it was just such a shame, such a missed opportunity to only be um, posing as those caricatures that have been spread all across the world. There is something extremely rich and powerful about Japan and the history here. And we have been doing ourselves a disservice by holding on to that for dear life without sharing any of it at all. Um, because I do really believe that in responsible sharing of it, we also create much um, more valuable conversations with people on the other side. If we're only speaking superficially, we'll only get superficial responses. But if
mm,
we're able to go deeper, we're able to create richer relationships with other people. And ultimately, I find that to be maybe it's just a little bit of a seed but a seed towards some level of world peace. um, but yes, I feel like Japan has been misrepresented or misrepresenting themselves for quite a while, and um, a it's I think it's a ripe time to muster the courage to share. Um, and again, that has to be done in a culturally and environmentally
Mm.
responsible way. Um, and I thought, yeah, the time is now.
Mm. Do you find that what you're doing, like a lot of locals, understand what you're trying to do, or like kind of think like, well, that's very silly. That's what we do on a regular basis. Why do you need to, study it and share it? What has been some of the challenges you've encountered since setting up your company and kind of pulling the pieces together to because you're basically like your own advocate, right? You're like, I really believe in this and I really think we need to do more, and
Yeah,
who's on board with me and who wants to go on this journey with me. And like you said, Japanese culture, and in some ways, I do also think Taiwan and other cultures have similar barriers. Whether it's generational, culturally, etc. So I can understand some of that from my angle as well. But I thought if you could share with us some of the things you've encountered that, I guess, if you think about if you were in the States, it would be different, right? Like how you approach it and that mindset. So yeah, like I feel like that in itself has probably been a little bit of a challenge for you. And how have you overcome it over the last few years? you know.
yes. Well, the first research project I did, the field work I did was around rice. And the reason why I dove into rice was because my career to date had really been about food. And so I thought, what better vehicle to begin the field research than rice as the ultimate staple of Japan. And in going to all of these nooks and crannies of the Japanese countryside for several years, I quickly realized that domestically it's difficult to have a conversation about rice because it is a given. It's a given, but it's also just white or just brown, and it's not very Instagrammable. Um, and it's a such a um, such a given that there's just no people don't find it to be an interesting conversation starter here in Japan. Um, what I was interested in doing was using this staple of Japan to have a more holistic conversation about the food system, about the cultural idiosyncrasies of how we use the word rice in our vocabulary, um, about environmental and political issues of our times. And so Japanese people are certainly not used to speaking about rice from those perspectives. Um, and also, Japanese people are not comfortable speaking about hard things like environmental or political issues. Um, and so it was much easier to have these conversations with my friends and allies internationally. It was already interesting to people to talk about rice from a food systems perspective, from an environmental perspective, from a political perspective, from a cultural perspective. And so I felt no barriers to entry speaking to an international audience about Japanese rice, which was such an aha moment in itself. I thought, okay, it's all of my time outside of Japan that brings me to this point of being able to have these fluid conversations with my friends internationally because the prime audience is actually there. And in in having these conversations with my friends internationally, I'm able to then um, raise awareness even domestically within Japan, because I'm able to create a little bit of a buzz outside of Japan. And if I'm able to create a little bit of a buzz outside of Japan, then Japanese people kind of turn around and wonder, well, maybe that's cool, or that's interesting, or that's something that we should care about.
Can you share your terminology for that? I loved your backward importing. Is that right?
Ah, yes, yes. That's an economics term in Japan that obviously is not a economics term outside of Japan, but yes, it's called gyakuyunyu in Japanese, and it's a very effective economic strategy, backwards importing, where you just throw something outside from Japan outside, and then it boomerangs back, and when it boomerangs back, then that can create proper resonate properly here domestically.
Mm, 'cause that's basically what you're doing.
Right, that's basically what I'm doing. So my initial intention wasn't necessarily to leverage this scheme, but it seems to be the most effective, which is very curious thing. So that's certainly one aspect of it. But there are certainly times and people and places where the research I'm doing around seaweed right now, for example, I think a lot of Japanese people find that really intriguing. Um, but but part of their intrigue is in the fact that my sharing internationally about Japanese seaweed is interesting to anyone at all, is interesting to Japanese people. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's very normal across anything, right? Like again, it's like you go to any culture and it's like, well, that's their day to day. Like that's what they do every day. Like how is that interesting? But then for someone who's never seen it before or thought to process certain food or etc in a certain way, it's like, oh, I didn't know I could, you know, make potato dishes, 1,000 different ways, or that there's,
Right.
hundreds of different varieties of potatoes, and actually they all taste different. Or I'm coming making this up, but I'm assuming that's kind of the same concept. Yeah.
No, precisely. I mean, I just had a conversation with one of the researchers on my team the other day, and she was so, she was so taken aback the fact that I was sharing about our koji fermentation research, and sharing all of the different ways in which koji mold is used in Japanese cookery to make all of our classic condiments, whether it's miso or soy sauce or vinegars or sake. And she was blown away because it's miso and soy sauce and sake, and all of these condiments are so basic in Japan, that the fact that it was creating this wonderful, vibrant conversation and aha moment with visitors from outside of Japan was so exciting for her, but also so mesmerizing
Yeah.
because it's such a given.
Yeah, but I think that's what we're taking granted for it nowadays, right? Just how easy it is to access all these things. And so we are like, I guess we are in this kind of middle generation, right? Between like the elders and the next generation after us, who probably have no clue where your cabbage is grown from or where your soy sauce is made from. Like it's not something you think about nor appreciate because you just buy it at a store and it's so convenient. It's like it's a no-brainer. You don't think about it. But when you experience, and a quick example is I went to do a tofu making, and it was hard work. It took 4 or 5 hours to make tofu. And I said, oh, I will forever appreciate all the tofu I eat now, all the soy milk I drink now, because it was a very long process to get the beans, from the beans to the liquid to the tofu and the fermentation. Yeah. So if you don't see any of that, you have no clue. You don't know how to appreciate it. Or even with our food, right? It's like the process of cooking from procurement to prepping to cooking to cleaning is a long process and it takes time. But we live in environments now where we can just press our phone and it gets delivered to us. Yeah. So I think what you're doing is even more important than just the educational part. It's like and as you always say too, like it's a way of living, right? And also like
Mm.
understanding where everything comes from and how it's an integral part of our being. And so I actually was curious if that was also something quite important for you too. Like for you personally, your day-to-day living, it's like do you go to the markets in the morning to procure your ingredients that you will cook for the week, or do you actually cook at home daily to live this, I guess if I can put it quote unquote, like this lifestyle that you preach. So
Yeah.
is that something that you've always done, or it's more and more what you do now because of, again, how important this is to you and to the research you're doing and to understanding our land and giving thanks to where our food comes from and how it nourishes us?
Because I was had the great opportunity to work with really fantastic chefs and food purveyors and farmers when I was doing my food television work. Um, that level of relationship building and respect for all players of the food system came to me quite early. And, I participated in my local CSA and that sort of thing, buying directly from farmers, but certainly going out to eat and going to the supermarket were part of the cycle too. Um, in Japan, because my first research project was around rice, I quickly became quite friendly with rice farmers and farmers of all types up and down the archipelago, and so even now I buy um, much of the rice that I eat as well as produce from farmers. And then in Japan, and definitely in Kyoto, there's lots of really fantastic greengrocers who um, really know the produce that is coming through the door and have extremely strong relationships with those farmers. And so you almost have like a um, uh, greengrocers, I always think, are the produce sommeliers, so to speak, and so they're able to give you advice on, well, this eggplant is best cooked in this way because it's still quite green, or this melon is quite overly ripe, so maybe make it into a jam or something like that, and so building a kind of like multi-layered um, community around food has really helped me to enjoy eating simply, but eating as a result of the relationships that exist there.
It sounds so perfect, but yet so hard, I feel like, for those who live in cities. It's almost like it just feels like a whole other world, like to be able to have access to that in that way. Yeah. Well, anyway, if we went into the whole like modernized food industry, that's a whole other subject matter for another time, and I'm
We
sure
can
you
have
have
another
lots of
episode.
and yeah, I'm sure you have lots of thoughts on that as well. I I wanted to come back to you picking intangible to tangible. If you can illustrate with us why you chose that as the theme of our topic today, for those who might think it's a little abstract.
It is abstract, isn't it? And that's why it's so tough. Um, Yeah, my entire career really has been around the trying to make the intangible tangible. I mean, even in television, it's just spoken word on a screen, and and it only serves as inspiration for you to then take that and make it tangible in your own life. So if you see someone cooking up a storm in a kitchen, and you can't smell it and you can't taste it, but somehow it inspires you to make that dish at home, that's kind of converting the intangible to the tangible. When I first started my research around rice, it was really just me, myself, and I going traipsing through the Japanese countryside, learning from farmers about rice cultivation and traditional natural farming practices, and all of these 400 varietals of rice that we grow in Japan today. And um, through that, I realized that I cannot just wax lyrical about it. People can only absorb so much. And this is what led me to create a rice subscription program. So I decided to create a limited rice subscription program where I would create 100 rice blends across 4 years. And I decided to create blends based on the traditional micro-seasonal calendar of 24 seasons across a single year. And so every 2 weeks, I was creating a rice blend with various rice varietals that I thought would be best paired with seasonal vegetables of the time. And the reason I decided to do this was not because I wanted to be a rice shop at all, but I realized that people need something tangible, something that they can touch, feel, taste, and in order to have these conversations that I wanted to have. Humans, um, you know, I think have a connection with um, ideas, but I think they have a stronger connection with things. And then to take that even further, I think they have a stronger connection to people. People ultimately like people. And when I was doing television, this was one thing that we always talked about, the production team and I always talked about is um, ultimately the um, the cook in front of the camera does not need to be an incredible cook. They need to be an incredible personality and an incredible communicator. And I think that the same goes for my situation now is that ultimately it's not about the rice or the seaweed or the indigo or the tree sap that I'm researching. It's about who's on the other side. Who are the makers, the seed savers, the cultivators, the fermenters, the harvesters? Who are all of those people? Because that's what makes this experience interesting. And the thing is basically just a physical representation of the relationship with those people.
Mm, that you just answered kind of answered like this question I had in my mind when you were talking about this because I was thinking, oh, when you said, oh, back when I was doing my rice research, it was just me, myself, and my car, and I was driving around the countryside of Japan. How did you go about finding all these farmers? Because they're not on Google Map, they don't have a storefront. You kind of needed to really put yourself out there and be like, knock, knock, hi, I'm this kind of like American Japanese girl who would like to talk to you about your rice. Right. And then I'm sure they're all oji songs, like, older grandmas and grandpas, who, to your point earlier, obviously probably very friendly as well, but probably think, why are you asking us these questions? Like, so strange. Like, why are you so curious about X, Y, and Z things that this, over the years, because you've been doing this for a while now, like, do you feel like, and through word of mouth of them sharing with other farmers and welcoming you into, their farms, that people are starting locally. Like they're starting to quite understand now, like, ah, she's actually trying to do some more research on how these are done to preserve this, right? Because as the aging population continues to age in Japan and there's less farmers doing the actual manual work, and maybe young generation, which I saw when I came to the retreat, who are interested in cultivating this lifestyle and want to learn, they still rely on the elders for that knowledge. So is that something that you kind of encountered? Was there ever a time where you felt defeated, like, "Ugh, this one farmer just won't talk to me," or or like they just don't want to share their secret? Like, they make amazing rice or whatever it is they produce, but yet they just, yeah, like don't want to share. Because that's the other side,
Yeah.
right? It's like very different from your TV production days in the US, where it's very much like, you know, I'm I come from whichever company you worked for and we're going to pay you for blah 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 blah. Here you are just soloing and wandering, and like it's a very different kind of approach.
Yes, absolutely. And there are definitely hurdles along the way. I have to say that I was incredibly lucky and blessed with people who were supportive of the field work that I was looking to do. At that time, I was still based in Tokyo. And so, in a big city like Tokyo, people come from all over, certainly from all over Japan. And so the way that I approached my field work was I would say, well, next week or next month, I'm going to such and such area. And then I would start asking everyone I know, does anyone know anyone in this region? Or does anyone know anyone who's from that region? And I would literally be passed from one person to another person to another person to another person. And ultimately, I would land at a farmer's property in the middle of nowhere. And yes, certainly there are people who are skeptical and quite conservative about their conversation. But as we proceed with the conversation, I see their little souls opening up to me and sharing further and maybe more than they would have initially expected. In Japan, people are, it's a very business card focused culture. And so the first thing that you say is, I am this company's Momoko. You say, you don't say, oh, hi, I'm Momoko. I am from such and such company. No, you always say the company name first or your title, and then you say your name. And so I was often asked, whose Momoko are you, and what do you do? Um, and and I thought, I might be better served if I create myself some sort of title, because literally it was just myself. And so I thought I would go kind of like go rogue and create like a character for myself. And so I began calling myself Rice Girl. Um, and At the time, these regional characters were really popular across Japan. So each region would have like a little cartoon character. Um, and so I was just hopping on that bandwagon, and I myself was my own cartoon character, basically Rice Girl. So I would say, okay, I'm Rice Girl Momoko, and I'm here because I want to learn further about the intricacies of Japanese rice culture and rice history and traditional farming techniques. And people would then pass me on to the next person and the next person and the next person. So I would just kind of I began just following the network that was naturally spreading. And that took me to literally just every nook and cranny possible of Japan. And I would always find it so funny that sometimes I would be driving in these mountains with rice fields spreading on both sides in the morning, and then by afternoon I would be near my apartment in Tokyo, like riding on my bicycle through like the concrete jungle. And it would all happen in one day basically. So I was like living this kind of dual life there too.
Rice Girl. That's a
Yeah.
cute name. Did you ever come up with a little logo for that?
Yeah, I had a logo. I also even had asked an illustrator to come up with like a character for a children's book that I haven't yet done anything with.
You
Um,
should continue.
yeah, I should continue. She's a superhero. Um, but yes, there's a lot of, I was just so blessed with the people, really. Everyone speaking on my behalf to introduce me to the next person.
Yeah, it's just kind of like a snowball effect. It just kind of kept going.
Yes, yes. To the point where one time a rice farmer created a driver's license for me um, with my rice girl name and my mission to service Japan through exploring Japanese rice culture.
Oh, that's so cute. What do you hope to see happen in the next? Because you started Kyoto Research Institute just only a few years ago. But I mean, you have deep, deep roots in all the work you're doing. But what do you ultimately hope to see happen? Like, let's say in five years time.
Well, actually, I incorporated the company only last year,
Mm.
and it's still a wee infant, I have to say. But yes, I'm very lucky to be able to build on the work that I had been doing to date. And um, I had always been skeptical about incorporating a company because um, I always say like I have like allergies to organizations and companies. That's probably why I was a freelancer for so long. Even when I was in the television space, I was often a freelance producer, um, kind of like a lone wolf, so to speak. Uh, but ultimately, I decided to um, just jump in with both feet and create a company because I realized that the research that I was so blessed to do um, was uh, recognizing these traditional materials and techniques. And it would be such an injustice for me to just keep that to myself or output it in kind of, small menial ways that only one single human can do. Um, and also more than that is that I didn't want it to just die with myself, for it to only last my lifetime. And so I needed to create a structure where the research, the documentation, and the sharing can live far beyond my lifetime. And then that's when I realized that maybe the best way to do that was to create an organization that can house that, and also for it to facilitate it to continue moving forward.
Mm. Does doing that in terms of like the funding for it, was that difficult too? Like it's like a startup, you have to go be like, here's my case. Would you like to support it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now the funding is just me, and I don't know. I need to continue navigating how that funding continues. Ultimately, I want to this is not a non for profit organization. It is a for profit organization. And that's very intentional because I want to showcase that these heritage materials and techniques have a place in our current life. And if they have a place in our current life, then that means that there is a monetary value to them, and that we can create a really strong cyclical system that incorporates these materials. And so I need to be able to showcase that by being a for profit company, and not just taking donations. So I'm still kind of going through the weeds, really, of like what exactly that looks like, the best structure for that. But I want to be able to prove that this is possible.
Mm,
Um, Most research institutes are housed within universities or within large companies that they do research for product R&D and that sort of thing. But if you're within a company or if you're within a university, research can often be swayed by the politics of that company or that university, and I really wanted to be independent. Um, and so I've thought there's got to be another way, and I don't know what the answer is yet, but I hope that with the help of intelligent friends and family like you, Jen, I can find a way because there is something really valuable here that is being um, researched and collated and documented. And the more that I can get more eyeballs on it, the more that I think we can all benefit. So um, yeah, I'm definitely reliant on my own network of friends and family that I've built over the years to make that happen because certainly I cannot, I don't think I can land on that answer myself.
That is true. It will come in good time, just like the farmers did. So I want to also ask you if you could just share with us a little bit about Mana. Like, how did that relationship come to fruition? And if I really, really enjoyed the retreat that you curated for Mana on culinary last December, and you have a few more lined up for this year. And I think it's a great way to actually showcase what Kyoto Research Institute has done, right? That's another way of the sharing. And so if you could we can just, do a little promotion, I guess, for that as well. To, and for, so other people can, we'll put the information in the episode link below so people can find out more if they're interested in joining. So if you could just share a little bit about Mana and, how you came about working with them to curate this, because I also think that what you have done for them in some ways is also transferable for you to create other programmings for other people, right? Like I'm just throwing out things like school trips, right, for kids who want to come through Kyoto for a week, and you could do some sort of integrative learning through that, or other research institutes around the world who want to do a cross collaboration of exchanging ideas and seeing how things are done with you guys versus what they do, etc. So there's actually like many, many possibilities from the research and the sharing that can be done.
Yes, absolutely. Mana Homes was founded by my dear friends Irene and Hannah, and they started the company, I think, around 8 years ago, and essentially um, kind of rooted in their interest in Japanese design, aesthetic, and also traditional craft technique. And what better way to share and experience Japanese craft technique than in the form of a hotel accommodations. Certainly, this can be experienced through shops where you can buy products. This can be experienced through, let's say, a restaurant that's designed in such a way. But a hotel or like a place where you can stay is a really great way to experience craftsmanship for a longer duration. And you can kind of experience this space 360 degrees. And I have known Irene and Hannah for several years now, and they have been incredibly supportive and interested in the field work that I do. And um, they were interested in creating experiences for their guests, as well as any other incoming travelers into Kyoto, and suggested that maybe there's a way in which Kyoto Research Institute can kind of reveal and share some of the work that we do in the form of these experiences. And so together we created a series of workshops that can be taken any day, basically. They're offered daily. And these workshops are just a sneak peek or a representation of some of the research we do on these heritage Japanese materials. And then we also decided to create retreats uh, that are 4 nights, 5 days, that dive deeper into specific topics. So, Jen, you were able to join the culinary retreat. Recently, we had an architecture retreat. In late May, we'll have a tea harvest retreat. In September, we'll have a pottery retreat. And then moving forward, we'll probably have other retreat topics as well. But again, the intention is not to have a uh, kind of a like a general experience of the topic, but I want it to be as thoroughly educational as possible and also recognize, again, the people who make all of this possible. So, for example, the architecture retreat, I'm not so interested in like just taking people on a tour of architectural sites, but really more diving deeper in understanding all of the craftspeople and the techniques and the raw materials that are needed for Japanese construction.
Yeah, I would say if anyone is interested in deep diving, because you are a walking encyclopedia, so so you definitely will gain a lot of know-how by participating because Momo, you are filled with knowledge to share. A great storyteller as well. Okay, so we're coming short on time. And so I want to first, I'll thank you again for your sharing just now. That was very, very nice to hear your journey and your story and your passion in what you do. I usually end with a few questions for my guests. So do you want me to ask you one by one, or should I just like ask you, it's three questions, but I actually came up with one more for you, just for you. So there's four questions I have for you.
Great. One by one is okay.
Okay, so what keeps you grounded is the first one.
Mm. Um, I would answer this differently now than I probably would have several years ago, but it's my family. I think it's because I was moving around a lot, and I also was kind of trying to find my own place in space and identity. Um, my family probably keeps me um, grounded so that I'm free to explore without fear.
What would you have said before?
I don't
Because
know. My
it
passport.
your passport. What keeps you grounded is your passport. Well, it's an interesting answer, right? You said family because it takes it takes time for you to realize that, right? Like you have to kind of go through your journey and all the trials and etc. that you've kind of gone through to kind of come to this point where you're like, ah, yeah, being here and the now and with my family, it's because of them that I was able to do all those things. But maybe previously it wasn't as smooth riding, for instance. Maybe there was a lot of like arguments and behind the scenes things, that you at the time was very frustrated and had to deal with, but now in hindsight when you look back it's like, ah, okay, you know, there is a reason. Something like that.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I think that uh, as I grow older, I realize uh, that my sense of safety um, and yes, groundedness comes from the fact that I have a relatively close relationship with my immediate family, individually and also collectively. And yes, before I would have probably said something like my passport, even though that's like takes you up in the air. But I think that level of like flexibility and agility was my strong suit and also my comfort zone, so to speak. Like the fact that I can just leave and go anywhere at any time was was somehow comforting to me. Maybe another part of my life, I would have said like miso soup and rice.
Well, that probably still is like second to your family right now. Okay, so the next question is, what to scent would you tell those who are listening to this episode who relate to your story, yeah, like a 2 cent saying, or another way to put that question is, what would you tell your younger self what you know now?
What would I tell my younger self? That nothing is forever. So I think that often when I was younger, everything was so precious. Every decision was so precious. Every opinion of other people was so precious. But ultimately, people forget, time moves on, things happen. And so that I don't need to feel so locked in or so committed to everything. I also think that Jen, you and I still were raised in a generation where you needed to find a career and, be laser focused and be like at the top of that pyramid. But often now I tell younger people that you will always change your mind, so don't worry about it.
That is very true. And also because it's constantly changing, the environment is constantly changing. So it's, as they always say, right? Nothing is permanent. It's always of impermanence, right? So the wise ones before us, all the sayings that they left for us holds true.
Holds true, yes.
Okay. And third one is, so usually I'll ask people like what's their favorite book or podcast or mentors or anything that has kind of helped you along the way in your journey, that whenever you kind of had doubts or you felt challenged and you felt down, and you picked up this book or whatever resource it was that you held dear to you, that you felt like if you met a young person or someone else, who kind of across your life path and shared their journey with you, and you're like, oh, you really should read this book, it really helped me, or you really should travel to this place, or you really should go eat at this restaurant, it's life changing, or whatever, whatever it is that has kind of kept you hopeful and inspired you along the way. If you could share that with us, and it could be a few books if you have a few books, or um, whatever your answer is.
Gosh, that's a tough one. What would I say? Mm, with books, I'm not sure. I have to put a pin in it. With just, let's say, a restaurant, um, I always prefer when I'm traveling to go to the supermarket of the place I'm visiting, just to stroll around, like what exactly, do they have, what sort of interesting ingredients or packaging is there. And I do this not just when I'm traveling internationally, but I do this when I'm traveling domestically within Japan too, because there's so many regional differences. And so exploring these like giant supermarkets is actually really interesting to me. It's part of the field work that I do, to be honest. So I would say definitely going to there's just this hyper local supermarket of the place you're visiting is one thing that I do. In terms of like books, quite a while ago, I read a book called Becoming Supernatural. Um, I'm blanking on who it's by, so I'll have to look it up. Um, but Becoming Supernatural basically is a scientific um, explanation or measurement of meditation and how the brain responds to meditation, and also to be more specific, like a very very pinpoint type of meditation. And it was interesting to me because you're able to articulate the intangible and very tangible, and taking the metaphysical into more of a physical, and taking the what you qualify into more of a quantifiable measurement. um, and it really resonated with me. It was really enjoyable to think about meditation on a kind of academic from an academic perspective. um, and so I suppose that's the one I would recommend.
That one's by Joe Dispenza, right?
Yes,
Dispenza. Yeah,
Joe's
yeah,
Joe Dispenza.
yeah. I love your answer on the supermarket one. Um, because yeah, I think that's the first time someone has said visiting supermarkets when you travel. So thank you for sharing that one. And I do think it's true because it does in its own way, it brings out a different energy when you do that, right? Like, and it gives you a very different perspective. Yeah. So yeah, that's a nice one. Um, I have a special one for you. I have never asked people this before. How would you recommend to people to eat seasonally?
Yes, I as part of the field work I do, I study the Japanese sense of time. I do study the 72 microseasons across a year because it is a more tangible way to talk about seasonality in Japan. But when I speak about 72 seasons across a year to people who are not domestically within Japan, clearly those 72 seasons are very different depending on where you are. And so for me, the micro-seasonal calendar called Koyomi in Japanese is only only serves as prompts for how you may think about seasonality wherever you call home. So, for example, if the micro season is called Rainbow's Hide, so that's the name, the title of that micro season. Um, in your neck of the woods, you might rainbows might be all over during that time, and they're it's kind of like rainy and sunny at the same time, and rainbows might not be hiding at all. But the prompt around that is, well, what are the things that you know that are there but you cannot see? And sometimes that means that you can hear crickets but you cannot see them, or you know that there's mountain water kind of flowing underground, but you can't see that either. And it kind of prompts you to hone in and be more observant of your surroundings. And so when I think about seasonality in terms of eating and food, I always recommend people to hone into your hyper local environment in your own, tune into your body. How are you feeling during those 5 days? If you're breaking down 365 days into 72 micro seasons, how are you feeling during those 5 days? Are you feeling particularly thirsty? Are you feeling particularly solemn? Are you feeling, particularly excited? Um, and then have, and then enjoy your foods in a way that matches that kind of feeling or that mood or that observation. So it's a little bit more uh, kind of fluffy than the answer that you might have been looking for. But yes, that's kind of what I would say.
Well, I wouldn't say it's so much fluffy. I think it's a kind reminder that being intuitive with yourself and being intuitive with Mother Earth, like that is what is seasonal, right? Like, so it goes without saying whether it's food or how we dress for the day outside, right? And knowing, um, yeah, how to climatize our body temperature and what kind of food you need to nourish yourself. But again, for another conversation for another time, it's kind of like, well, so many of us nowadays are not in tuned, right? And so that's why it's very confusing, just like our climate is confused now. So anyway, that's a whole other conversation, but that's why I thought that was interesting to bring about the seasonal aspect, because that's a really big part of also the work you do. But I think to just put it simply, is just be in tuned. You just need to be in
Mhm.
tuned with yourself and with your body and connect with the foods that you're intaking in that way.
Yes, absolutely. That's what
Yeah.
I think too.
Okay, well, that was my bonus question for you. And I don't have any other questions right now. I will put all the links so that people can find you on social, online, and the retreats that are upcoming that you mentioned earlier. And I don't know, is there anything else you want to add to our conversation before we wrap up?
No, I mean, it was just such a joy to be able to speak with you. It's again like so thrilling for me to be able to share the work that I do, but also with like minded people who, are doing really like rich, juicy work like you, Jen. I think is just really such a joy. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so honored to have you.
Thank
We
you.
will keep in touch and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening to Curito Connects. For more Connects content, collaborations, and discoveries set to inspire you on your own individual journey, please head to our website at www.curito.co. Until next time, stay inspired and thank you for joining us at Curito Connects.